Jumping into Bluebook number 4, reading module 1. Let's get into it. Starting off with our first word here, although we want to get really good at picking up on these transitions, although is going to set us up for a change. So no matter what I'm about to read, it's going to go in the opposite direction. So critics believed that, customers would never pay to pick their own produce. I know it's going to be the opposite. Such concerns didn't worry, they didn't bother this guy because it was ultimately going to end up successful. So that's just going to be hinder here, not to impede, not to slow down, not to hinder. Enhance would be in the opposite direction. That would be like improve. Nothing's being misrepresented here, and he's not being aggravated. That's like kind of trying to make someone mad, Jumping down to number 2, we have a really good one here. Let's see. Artisans, they typically, so these words are going to really help us. Usually, normally, blank the bronze and brass cutting techniques that have been passed down for, generations, but they don't strictly observe every tradition. So we want a word that is like they usually follow the rules, but not always, because that's what the end does here. At the end, they're like, sometimes they do use other things, right? Like these motors. So what is going to be like kind of typically following the roles? That's going to be adhere. Adhere is usually used with like following the roles, following something that's been put in place. They don't typically improve upon because they're not changing anything. They're definitely not experimenting with. And grapple with is like, it's a weird verb. It's like maybe a main character in the novel you're reading grapples with a conflict. They deal with a conflict. But here it's going to be normally follows, typically adheres to. Looking up at number 3. We have, let's get a new color. Set in a world where tropes exist as everyday realities. In a science fiction universe. Quest to find his father. You can skip through most of this because the journey at the novel center is so blank. So, definitely not enough context here. Let's see what adjectives or words they use. The protagonist ricocheting chaotically. Don't need to go any further. The center is so crazy, wild, random that they're ricocheting chaotically, right? And it's a really weird word. Haphazard does actually mean, random, aimless, no order to it. So haphazard's going to fit perfectly here. Premeditated would be the opposite. You usually hear it in like court cases. If there was a crime that was premeditated, it was planned out, not chaotic. Inspirational doesn't fit at all. And then fruitless, try to think if you did something that was fruitful, it would be like beneficial, you gained something. Fruitless would be like you didn't gain anything, it was kind of pointless. Jumping into number 4 here, we have these colleagues found that single-celled organisms not only use strategies to escape stimuli, but also switch strategies when one fails. So this is where you have to do your best to kind of like feign interest. Like even if you don't find these passages to be the most engaging, do your best during studying, do your best on the test because that was interesting. The reason is because when they say single-celled, you're thinking really simple, really basic, not much function. But as soon as they say it's switching strategies, they're already hinting towards your answer. They're saying that this thing is maybe a little bit more advanced than we were first thinking, right? Single-celled should be really basic, switching strategies more advanced. That leads into this evidence that them, sophisticatedly changing their minds demonstrates that single-celled organisms may not be limited to the really basic behaviors we were maybe thinking. So we want something negative here. They're not limited to these basic behaviors. They're actually advanced in some sense. So aggressive doesn't fit at all. That's not going to be, basic or even the antonym of being like advanced. We'll come back to B. Evolving is going to be the antonym, right? They're not limited to evolving behaviors. They're not limited to basic behaviors because they are showing these kind of evolving behaviors. And then advantageous, same thing. We want a negative word here, not a positive word. And rudimentary, the only reason I know this word from Sherlock Holmes, right? Rudimentary, my dear Watson. This is going to be like really basic, really simple. It fits perfectly there. Down to 5. Let's shift this over. And let's see. So some economic historians blank that all this stuff is happening. They assumed this is where like, okay, if you really want to jump into this, there's a lot going on there, but look what they do. They set us up for actually a really easy synonym. Sometimes it can be hard to find our synonym in these passages. They assumed, well, who's they? Some economic historians. So it fits perfectly. We're looking for a word that matches with assumed because subject, verb. We have a nice parallel here. So they assumed is going to be the opposite of questioned. I skipped these 2 words just because they're going to be a little bit more advanced. You do want to anticipate Maybe there's going to be a word or two that are really challenging. Let's focus on the ones we know. To question something is to kind of challenge it. To assume is to just accept. So these are definitely antonyms. Regret is just irrelevant. It's not going to fit with this at all. So between these two words, I would recommend like Quizlet. All you have to do is Google like Quizlet, SAT, word banks. Practice some words, get some exposure. Surmised is going to be a synonym of assuming or supposing. Contrived is going to be as opposed to something happening naturally. You're kind of forcing it. You're deliberately doing something. So surmised fits perfectly here. It is a synonym. On to number 6. Let's see. Okay, we have a text. These people are telling Miss Glory why their company manufactures robots. Okay. So this guy, one robot can replace 2.5 workmen, was terribly imperfect. It had to be removed. Okay. It was too expensive. It was not effective. Okay. So they're talking about the human worker. It no longer answers the requirements of modern engineering. Okay. So that's probably the main point here, right? It no longer answers requirements. What do you do to a requirement? Do you explain a requirement? Do you rebut? Rebut is like to argue. Do you defend a requirement or do you fulfill a requirement? They're talking about workers working, right? They're talking about producing products. So they're no longer like fulfilling those requirements to work at this place, right? So fulfill here perfectly fits. On to the reading section, starting with number 7 here. Can I scroll down a little bit? Yeah, that fits. Okay. So let's get a different color. So we have this team at NASA. They set out to build a helicopter. The atmosphere, 1% is dense, so really different. It doesn't provide enough resistance. How are they going to resolve this? They tested designs. They ultimately designed one that had longer blades and rotate faster. Those are really the only 2 things that are important here. You want to try to master this kind of skimming concept. Only 2 things: different atmosphere to solve that problem, longer blades, rotating faster. That's it. They want to know, why would a helicopter built for Earth be unable to fly on Mars? Let's see. So starting with A, because they have different atmospheric conditions, that's probably right because it matches our first part we highlighted. Let's make sure there's no like really specific blade questions. But the thing is like A could never be wrong here because it's too on point, right? It matches this too much. But just in case you might have got something else here, let's see. Because the blades built for Earth are too large, well, that's definitely not it, because they said the blades are longer for Mars. So they're not built too big for Earth, right? The gravity on Mars is much weaker. Even though we might have external information here, they don't mention anything about gravity. Because helicopters built for Earth are too small. They don't actually say anything about the size of the helicopters. They talk about the blades being longer. Specifically, they didn't even say the blades are bigger, just longer. So we can definitely mark D off. It's just going to be A there. Looking over at number 8, we have these jollies have traditionally been keepers of information. So have traditionally been, maybe there's going to be a change here because like usually they were, maybe something changed, right? They records of important events. They often served as teachers. And here's that change. New technologies have changed some aspects of them, but they continue to be valued for knowing stuff. Okay, so a nice positive passage here. The main idea is that these guys have done something. There's been a change, but they're still valuable. Even though there have been some changes, they continue to preserve their history. That's it. Do you see? This is our whole goal, is like going, it's kind of like math when they want you to form your equation in the problem instead of relying on your answers. Same thing. We are trying to form our main ideas, our most important pieces of information before we make it to our answers. So we're not scrambling. Gonna be A here. Perfect match. Down to 9. We have Jack London's novel, Call of the Wild. Buck. So this part's always important because you like to have an intro to your character. So Buck is the sled dog, and then John, I guess, is the owner of the sled or the dogs. So Thornton alone held Buck. Okay, so important connection between the two. The rest of mankind was nothing. So it's like those two, no one else matters. They might praise him, but he was cold under it all. He didn't really care for strangers. When Thornton's partner, so maybe his friends, arrived, Buck arrived, he refused to notice them until he learned they were close. Okay. After that, he tolerated them. So those two were really close. New people arrived. Once he learned they were friends, he kind of accepted them. So the main idea, same thing. He's become less social. Note they didn't mention anything before. They didn't mention like he used to be more social. He mistrusts humans and does his best to avoid them. I don't know about the mistrust part. It's more like he just doesn't care. Mistrust is a very specific word. I don't think it mentions anything about trust. Buck has been especially well liked by most of Thornton's friends. That is definitely not the focus here. The other people that were praising him, they didn't even look chance travelers. So those aren't even his friends. They're just random people. And then these new people, yeah, they seem to maybe like Buck, but that's not our main point. The main point is that Buck holds Thornton. He values this guy the most, where the only other people he'll accept are Thornton's friends. It's definitely going to be D here. Looking at number 10 here. Okay, let's get a different color too. So we have a book by Webb Du Bois. In the book, he suggests that hearing Black folk songs, he felt an intuitive and sometimes unexpected. So this is the part we really want to focus on. Intuitive, okay, like it naturally fit, a natural feel, and sometimes unexpected. So the cultural recognition part, that's where they're going to try to create some trick answers, but unexpected. So we really want to focus on like if an answer reflects the intuitive and unexpected result. So I go through A as the single spiritual heritage. So that's what I was talking about. That heritage part is really easy to mimic this, but I don't see anything about there being something unexpected. That's very specific. I go through B. Ever since I heard I was a child, these songs stirred me strangely. There it is. Unknown to me. And yet at once I knew them. So they bring it back. They start with like the strange, the unknown, the unexpected, but then it was mine. That's the intuitive, like he felt connected to it. So this still involves that kind of like heritage, that connection part, but it brings out that the unexpected term as well. So we're always looking for those really specific words that we can connect to our answer and not get tricked by like the okay answers. Jumping into number 11, we see it's a chart problem. Remember, ironically, with the chart questions, it's actually the passage that gives us all of our direction. Focus on the passage the most, get your direction. Sometimes you just use your chart as like a little bit of a tool to get your answer. So let's jump down to our passage. We see that these people, farmers in 3 locations, you see all 3 locations up here. Honestly, doesn't really say anything until down here. In some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent. There's a little bit of direction. Not only prominent, but constituted the majority for a few of these crops, for instance. So that's all I care about. When were these female farmers the majority for what crops and where? So I scroll up above here, and I think there's kind of 2 ways to look at this one. There's like the more simple way where it's just like, oh, look, these are like my 2 biggest bars by far, right? But the more advanced way would be, well, what constitutes a majority, right? If you have 100 people, it's going to be 51. It's always going to be a little over 50% is going to get us our majority. So you want to be really comfortable with your axes too. These are just my locations, but my y-axis is percentage. So anything over 50% is going to be a majority. I look at this bar, I look at this bar, they both meet that requirement. I go through my answers. I'm looking for north and south non-root. So I see A, and I see once they mention cereals, we get rid of that one. B, once they mention central Ondo, we get rid of that. And finally, C, non-root in north and south. That's it. So again, as you can see, we get all of our direction from our passage. We use our table just as like a little, tool to lean on, and we get C here. Jumping up to number 12. Let's see what we got here. Okay. They noted that F. Scott Fitzgerald's writings were likely influenced in part by his marriage to Zelda. Not enough context yet. But something's going to change here. Many don't recognize Zelda as a writer in her own right. So that gives us all the direction we need. They start with things that inspire F. Scott, but then they jump to Zelda's not just like an inspiration. She's her own writer. I could end it there, but just to show you how much more, like just to get the sense, I going through so many practice problems, I already have a sense of the direction they're going to go, but just so you can see their direction, Indeed, that just continues, authored a bunch of works. Those who primarily view Zelda as just an inspiration, they're not recognizing that she is her own writer, right? So I didn't even need to read any further. Overlook the many other factors that influenced him, motivated him. Nope. Risk misrepresenting the full range of Zelda's contributions to literature, her own contributions. I don't need to go any further, but just in case you answered something else. May draw inaccurate conclusions about how they viewed each other's works. It's not about how they viewed each other. It's about how kind of we, the world, viewed her. and then tend to read the works in an overly, this doesn't make any sense, over autobiographical. That's like they are writing their own biographies. That's not what they're talking about here. So B for that one. Down to 13. Okay. We have these dinosaurs could grow more than 100 feet, huge, and some researchers have attributed. Okay, so some researchers, it's almost like you get a direction already. Oh, remember the some historians where they ended up assuming and supposing they were wrong. It's almost like when they say some researchers, they're going to kind of like contradict them. So some researchers have attributed this to high levels of carbon dioxide, and then however. Again, you start to really get in tune with the SAT writers the more you practice. However, I don't need to read any further. They're going to say that stuff they just said is wrong. It wasn't attributed, or it didn't end up being because of the increased carbon dioxide. Just to prove it, they say there is no evidence of significant spikes in carbon dioxide coinciding with where they evolved to such large sizes. Look through the answers. Fluctuations in carbon dioxide affected different ones differently. Nope. The evolution of them did not depend on increased carbon dioxide. That's it. Just to check. Atmosphere carbon dioxide was higher when they lived than when the first ones appeared. So that would be going against, right? That would be saying maybe there was influence because it was highest when they were biggest. And then, so that would be like maybe weakening our argument. And then D, they probably would not have evolved if they had been slightly higher. That's going in like the opposite direction. That's like saying if they went higher, they wouldn't have evolved to be that big. So they don't say that either. They're pretty much just saying there's no evidence that it was because of the increased carbon dioxide. And looking up at number 14 here. For punctuation, we want to get a lot of practice. This is going to be more, you know, in the reading, a lot of the times, most of the times we're just diving in and getting an idea of our main concepts. In punctuation, it's the opposite. I'm always going to jump to my answers first. So we always want to go in order of our strongest punctuation. That means I'm starting with periods and semicolons, then I'm going to colons, then I can deal with the other stuff, the commas, the no punctuation, etc. So the first answer I jump to here is colon. What are going to be my colon roles? Colon roles are going to be when we list two things, when we are left on a cliffhanger, and sometimes when we go from something broad to something specific. We will get examples of all of those. Let's see if I see anything here. Known for these massive things, Kalita Garcia Rawls, colon. Was the logical choice, and then they describe the book. So I see definitely no list here. They leave off on a name. So they didn't even leave us off on like, they were like scientists determined a new way to analyze atoms, colon. Like building us up to a cliffhanger. They didn't even give us a direction for a cliffhanger yet. Also for like broad to specific, they didn't really say anything before this. There's not going to be really something to specify after. So I don't see really any of our colon roles being met here. This is where we can look at some other good roles here. Our M dash is 99% of the time only going to be used with another M dash. It's going to be similar to double commas or surrounding a non-essential clause. We'll talk about more of that in the future. When it is by itself, it is equivalent to a colon. So red flag, we see pretty much two colon options here. And then this is your classic comma versus no comma. When you do get between these two, your roles change. When you see commas and no comma answers, you actually always try your no comma answer, because your extreme form of punctuation, what was periods, what was semicolons, now is no punctuation. If your no punctuation answer ever sounds okay, I say like 60 to 70% acceptance, like it sounds like average, it will always beat your comma answer. So Kalita Garcia Rawls was the logical choice to design the book. Notice how I didn't feel like I needed a pause there. It sounds completely acceptable. I don't even have to try C here. We go with D. Getting into number 15, same roles. Strongest punctuation, I jump to my period. What is a period or a semicolon going to do? So we test this by saying, could these two statements that I'm chopping in half, first, were they forced to be connected? We'll see examples of that. Also, do they function as two independent clauses? Not that they're not related. It's going to be completely fine if they're related. It's just that they are allowed to function grammatically separately. So let's look. So our sentence would be, this archaeologist was visiting when he noticed markings of red paint on the temple walls. Pause. With the help of digital imaging techniques, he discovered markings to be part of elaborate murals. Do you see how those grammatically function as two separate sentences? Easy answer. This saves you so much time because I'm not sitting there having to work through, does a with or does a comma work? Does no punctuation work? Does a so work? Jump to your strongest punctuation. If it works, you're done. Looking at 16. Let's get a different color here. Okay, so this one I can already tell by my answers. Again, punctuation is very answer driven. I already know this is going to be possession, right? Specifically, they like testing whether it is singular possession or plural possession. On top of that, they also like to test whether it's double possession or not. So I like that 60 to 70% rule. What that means is like you just have to meet this like barely acceptable range for it to be your answer. That's going to work with possession too. If it ever feels like something might be possessed by the word before it, it's going to be. So what I mean by that is, do you see in A, we have the grains possessing physical properties. Can a snow grain, can a sand grain possess physical properties? Sure, right? Physical properties could be like its color, its density, etc., right? So I do like having possession here. So I'm going to get rid of D. My second possession here, the properties part, could properties possess, etc. What's nice is our word after it is affect, a verb. Your possession is always going to be like a noun. Grains, physical properties. The skies, color, right? It's always going to be a noun that kind of it would be an attribute of the thing possessing it. So here, when it's like properties, possession, effect, it's never going to possess a verb. So this one's actually really easy. I can get rid of C and A just because of that. It's going to be IES, no apostrophe, because properties don't possess effect. It's a verb. So this is just going to be the grains, plural. So that's going to be our other difference here. When do you use it like this? When do you use it like this? This would be saying singular grains possessive. This is saying plural grains, like you have multiple grains of snow, physical properties. So yeah, that one's super easy. We go with B because we can get rid of everything else. On to 17 here. And what do we got? We have same thing. I jump straight to my semicolon answer. Let's see if this works as two independent clauses. So we read down, which was approved. Okay, so the mission initiative. So what's really cool here is as you're doing this practice, maybe if it's timed on Bluebook, you don't want to, but as you're going back through, you should. You want to practice getting rid of non-essential clauses. Here is a perfect example of a double comma non-essential clause. Notice how I can read through this now and it's still grammatically correct because of my double commas. The Mission 66 initiative represented a major investment. So all non-essential clauses do is they're good. They give us more information, but it's not grammatically necessary. It still functions without it. Represented a major investment in infrastructure of overburdened national parks. Pause. It prioritized physical improvements, utilities, employee housing, and visitor facilities while also establishing this. That is a perfect first sentence and second sentence, which is actually cool, is we get to talk about another role here. It's a little bit more rare, but while is only ever going to get to connect two clauses. So that actually proves that this has to be a semicolon because our first statement was it prioritized these four things while also establishing. So the listing four things was my first clause, while also establishing is my second clause, while can only connect two things. So we know it's going to be C here. I don't have to waste my time with any other answers. Up to 18 here. Let's check this one out. The Progressive Era, rise of numerous clubs, advocated for equality. Okay, so I can jump right down to here. Among the clubs, so this one's a little bit weirder where like there wasn't punctuation I can focus on. This is going to be context based. Among the club's leaders, you might be thinking maybe were, right? Because it sounds plural. Among the club's plural leaders, blank, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, founder of the women's club. How many leaders did they actually mention? One. So this is where context is going to be really important in our punctuation section, whether we have a plural subject or a singular subject. It sounds plural until they mention one leader. We know it's just going to be was. If they mention multiple leaders, it changes to were. So really not too bad. It's going to be A for that one. Down to number 19, another really good one here. Okay, so as we read through this, I see... so honestly, I glance at my answers a little bit just because I'm always checking, oh, is it like a semicolon period? These ones are going to be a little bit weirder because there's a lot of punctuation here. I got a ton of commas here. I got an M dash, and then here a colon. Let's get a little bit of context here, right? We have this genetics, Eli Eisenberg, right here. Look at the non-essential, a genetics expert. We can get rid of all of that. Eli recently discovered that. Okay, so we're getting a lot of practice with our non-essentials here. The M dash probably stands out the most to you here, right? So it should. An M dash, when it's used in pairs, has one purpose, and it's going to be creating a non-essential clause. So in B, they're saying that's non-essential. That means I can delete it, and it still grammatically functions. Your most extreme answer here is actually going to be, look at D here. D is saying I can delete all of this and my sentence will still function. So you really want to fixate to save time, especially on these module 2s, right? I mean, I know this is module 1, but for the module 2s, if you can focus on what answers to even start with because they're so extreme, the more extreme answers are going to be easier to prove whether they're right or wrong. If an extreme answer sounds okay, it's always going to be your answer. So I go with D because D deletes literally everything. So Eli recently discovered that cephalopods recently discovered that cephalopods have a special genetic ability called RNA editing. It works. This entire phrase, which we can kind of read up here because it's less crossed out. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. This entire phrase that ocean dwellers, that include the squid, octopus, and cuttlefish, it's a descriptive clause. All it's telling us is when we read cephalopods, 99% of us don't know what that means. This non-essential clause tells us that they are ocean dwellers, like the squid, the octopus, and the cuttlefish. But they're not necessary, they're not needed to make our sentence function. So D is going to be perfect here. It's all a descriptive clause. Why is C wrong? C has a colon that does properly list things, but that's always going to be at the conclusion of your sentence. You're never going to list 3 things and then continue on with the rest of your sentence. You'll see that trend later on when we do colon examples. It's always going to be a period at the end of your list. On top of that one, A is just going to be a massive run-on sentence. Cephalopods, ocean dwellers that include this, this, and this, have a special genetic ability. What D is doing differently is it's surrounding all that description as a non-essential clause that we can cross out. A is doing something similar to C where it's including a list in the middle of a sentence, which isn't going to work. So D for that one. Up to number 20 here. We have... Okay, being to be, so this is going to be another one where we just need context. It's not just like punctuation. So a model created by biologist predicts. Okay, so we already know we're talking about the future. I can probably just skip to my answer here. From the nearest mainland will be. So anytime you kind of see this like future tense, prediction, future, foresight, will be, right? It's going to be something in the future. So that one's just going to be D, predicts, will be. Down to 21. By contrast, so we're into the transition section. Sometimes your test will have like 3 or 4 of these. Sometimes it's going to have 1. Really important to practice these. And it's going to be context-based, so we do need to kind of read through a little bit. This writer considers the background research she conducts to be its own reward. Okay, cool. So she's writing about stuff. She does a lot of research. So this is where we're going to do, we don't have enough context yet. Is she going to contrast? Is she going to say something likewise? What does in fact do, right? Let's skip the blank and see what she does. Admits to finding the research phase just as fascinating as exploring the location in person. This is what we would call continuing. Your most basic transition analysis is going to be, am I flipping? Was I going in like a positive direction? Now it's negative. Was I going in a forward direction? Now it's backwards, right? That's going to be where we're using words like contrast and besides. Those are going to take the direction we were going and change it. The other way is just going to be continuing. So continuing is this person, really likes the research she's doing. And again, she admits the research is just as fascinating. So she's continuing her thought process here. When do we use in fact? When do we use likewise? In fact is going to fit into a really special category. It's going to be the same thing as I think we saw in indeed earlier. It's going to be the same thing as increasingly. You're going to see these in, I think that's it for now. We'll see if there's any other examples. Those are going to be our short, little, almost unnecessary transition words. So you can literally read this. Our answer is in fact. You can read this without in fact, and it still works. These are going to be considered our really, really weak transition words that aren't even necessary, but help give us that nudge. In fact, indeed, increasingly, etc. Likewise. So likewise is going to be really similar to similarly. So think if they were like, Geralt really liked to ride horses. Likewise, his friend Jimmy likes to train horses. So likewise and similarly are going to take a subject and what they do and create a similar scenario, but different enough, like maybe a different subject, maybe a different activity, but they're similar. That makes sense? So this doesn't do that. This is the same person liking the same thing. It's not going to be a different person, different subject. So we're going to go with D here. Into the notes section with number 22. With a lot of these, I want to say as high as 80, sometimes 90% of them. We don't even need our notes. We can jump straight to our question here. They want to introduce, and specifically the question, I mean just this info part. They want to introduce the novel to an audience already familiar with that. So that's it. We just want to introduce the novel. So which one of my answers is going to introduce our novel? I look at A. The settings. So this person's in settings include these two places. So that's not the book. I think that's our author. We jump down to B. In addition to her novel, which was published here, they wrote other novels. So again, that's about the author, not necessarily our novel. Here it is. The novel was not only the only novel written by. So again, author, not novel. C, their novel, The Holder of the World, centers around, and there it is. So these ones, again, it's like 80, 90% of them. You don't even need your notes. You can skip straight to which one accurately answers the question they're asking. That one I wanted to describe our novel, and it's going to be C here. Looking at number 23, we have, they want to present the study and its findings. So number 1 and number 2. So study and findings. I look at A. They studied this and was initially unsure. So that's kind of like our premise. It doesn't give our findings. It gives like our problem. They didn't know, right? Located were the focus. That's the focus of the study. That's our aim, our hypothesis. I look at D here. In the study, they determined, there's findings, that the jaw bones located here had few growth lines relative to the fully grown and thus belong to juveniles. There's pretty much everything we need. Let's look at C real quick. They used advanced microscope techniques to analyze. So this again does not give our findings. This one describes our study and what they found, what they determined. So it's going to be D here. Looking at 24, let's get a different color here. We have they want to introduce this person and his novel to a new audience. Okay, author and novel. So A, we have this author published one of his most celebrated books, which is about a group of men who emigrate from Caribbean. That's going to be it. That's our author. That's our book. Let's go through the rest just to make sure. Looking at B, wrote novels, no descriptions about the novels. Some of the characters didn't say anything about the author. And C, didn't say anything about the author. From the perspective, I mean, they barely mention the author. A is a much better introduction to our author and one of their books, right? A is going to be our answer here. Getting into number 25, the student wants to emphasize a similarity between the two turtle species. I look at A. Among the 7 species is the olive Ridley turtle. So that just mentions 1, not a similarity between 2. I look at B. We have the Ridley turtle is referred to as this, while the olive Ridley sea turtle is referred to as that. We'll leave that one go for now. I think we're going to try to contrast this with another answer, so it makes more sense. In D, I just skipped down. I see the word different, so obviously they're not trying to say that they're similar here. And C, the word both. Both this turtle and this turtle can be found in the Atlantic Ocean. So when we contrast C with B, I know that it looks like, you know, the first word of both species is the same, but even in naming their species, they are different from each other. So even in the sense that like the first word's the same, their actual species title, you know, Kempe and Olivacea are just different. Whereas in C, it's much more emphasized, it's pronounced that they're trying to compare them. Both this and this can be found in the Atlantic Ocean, compared to B, where they're actually listing two different species names. So I think C is going to have a little bit more emphasis here on them being similar, where B is maybe more of like our trick answer here. Looking down at 26, let's go ahead and shift this up a bit. Our last two here, let's get through it. We have, they want to summarize the study. Okay, that shouldn't be too crazy. So for 2019 study, researcher from here collected data on auks attempts to land at nesting sites in different wind conditions. So I guess the only thing I would say here is this might be one of those ones where context matters, because when you're summarizing a study, you want like an intro, maybe a middle, and maybe a conclusion. A doesn't actually list a conclusion here, right? Maybe summarize the aim of a study, but a study should include results, right? I don't see that in A. In B here, we see Emily and her colleagues wanted to know the extent. So again, this would be more of our aim. That's what they're setting out to do, but not what they accomplished here. Let's look down at the bottom two here. C, knowing that they need multiple attempts, they studied the bird's success rate, which only around 20% in some conditions. Notice how they're deliberately being very vague here in some conditions. Well, what conditions were they testing, right? I jumped to D. In their 2019 study of auk success landing at cliffside nesting sites, look how detailed that is. They showed that as wind conditions intensified, now I'm seeing a graph, as it got more intense, their success rate decreased. This is going to be one of those ones where maybe you do even give one of your like A through C a chance, but you do ultimately resolve with D because it is the most detailed. I know exactly what the study was about and what our results were. This is one of those ones where I still think you don't need the notes, but you do probably have to read all the way through your answers to kind of, resolve with D. Then looking over at number 27, let's see what we have for the finale here. And a new color. They want to introduce Paradise to an audience unfamiliar with the novel and its author. I think we already did one of these. So you need to introduce your author and your novel here. So this person who wrote this was awarded, was born. This says nothing about the novel. Many readers have singled this a historical novel, nothing about the author. I look over at C. Let's kind of shift this up a bit. A much praised historical novel was written by this person, the winner. Okay, I'm liking C so far because it mentions a detail about both. And D just mentions, so this mentions a tiny bit. So this says a historical novel about the events that occurred in East Africa, this person's homeland. We don't even actually know that that's the author in C or in D. So just to clarify, in C was written by the winner of this. This gives a detail about him and we know he wrote it. In D, it could be just a random person. We don't know. So it's going to be C here. And that's it. Make sure to check out my other sections, the math and the reading module 2, hard and easy after this.